Hey, what's up, meandering spirits? It's Shane here. Today, I want to talk about and show you exactly how to properly fold and pack away your tent. A lot of people struggle with this, especially if it's your first few times out camping and if you have a brand new tent. So the technique I'm going to show you is pretty much applicable to most tents out there. And the great thing is once you learn the technique for one tent, you can apply it to all the other tents. So let's get into it. Okay, so before I show you how to properly fold your tent here, I want to go over the three main reasons why folding and packing away your tent is kind of vital and important. So the first reason why you want to pack it correctly is you don't want to risk damaging or ripping any of the fabric. The fabric itself of the tent, the nylon or the polyester portion, is fairly robust and strong. However, the interior portion, so this mesh material, that's not as strong and it can risk tearing or getting punctured if it's not packed away properly. Number two is the risk of dirt and grime getting into the tent pole connections. The way the tent poles come together, they're usually pretty easy. They come in and out pretty easily. However, if dirt and grime kind of get in there, it kind of makes it harder for the tent poles to come together or come apart. Just makes the whole effort of putting together a tent a little bit more difficult. All right, and so the third risk there is the risk of mold or mildew developing. And that's mostly due to packing away a tent that's wet or damp. You know, you're out camping and it does rain on you, and unfortunately you got to pack away and head back home. It's always a good idea to let your tent dry completely. I mean, you can pack it up temporarily, and then when you get back home, and if there's a nice sunny day, take it out and let it fully dry out. And the reason is because you don't want any mildew or mold that could develop over time. So the next time when you set it up, if it does sit around in that moisture, it tends to really smell, and it might even develop little mold or mildew that might develop inside or around your tent, which again isn't the most hygienic. So those are the three reasons why you really want to pack your tent correctly. Okay, so step one is to go inside of your tent and make sure all of the pockets and all the different compartments are free of any loose gear or anything that you might have forgotten inside. You don't want to pack that stuff away and then all of a sudden get to your car and realize, hey, where are the keys? They might be in there still. So go inside, check it out, clean it out. Okay, step number two is to shake the tent. This basically dislodges any dirt and debris as well as any water molecules that kind of had built up on either the tent fly or on the actual tent base or anything like that. So you want to go around, give it a good shake, knock out any debris that's kind of built up around the Rainfly or not on the inside. And this also, if you have any bugs or anything like that that's on or around your tent, it kind of knocks them off so that they don't get folded up in the process as well. So just give it a good shake, make sure everything's knocked off. All right, so step three is to remove any ground stakes as well as any guy lines that you have that's anchoring your tent to the ground. Basically, again, this frees up your tent so that it's able to come apart without being still attached to the ground. What I end up doing as well for the guy lines is instead of just having them all loose, I basically just come around, put my hand kind of like so, and then I just wrap the guy line over it, and then when I get to the end, release a little bit, just tie a few kind of loose overhand loops around it. That just keeps it all nice and neat so that they're not flopping everywhere when you're trying to fold up your Rainfly. So again, you can take out all the ground stakes that are around your tent. Okay, once you've collected all of your ground stakes, just put them in the appropriate bag. And then take that bag and make sure you tie that off. You don't want any of this loose stuff falling out. In some instances, the ground stakes bag has some repair gear as well, so you want to make sure that it's all nice, neat, and tidy. Okay, so the next step here, step four, is to remove the Rainfly cover. Some tents have a separate Rainfly, some don't. So if your tent doesn't have this, you can skip this step, but if it does, what you want to do is you want to zip up any of the doors of the Rainfly and then take that off of the main tent body. And in this case, the tent or the Rainfly has these little Velcro straps that have connected it to the tent pole system, so you just want to make sure you take those off. Now once the Rainfly is taken off, you can set that aside. However, as a pro tip, what I usually do is I set up a dry line around my campsite. I'm going to hang my Rainfly as well as any other parts of the tent system that I think is needs drying or needs to air out a little bit. So I'll do that for the tent fly as well as the footprint. Okay, step 5 is to actually go inside your tent and make sure there's no dirt and debris in there. So you want to clean all that up. There's a couple ways to do that. You can go inside, you can take a towel, like an older towel or older piece of clothing that you have, get in there and wipe everything to the door, and then just kind of open the door up and just sweep it all out. Another way of doing that, especially if a lightweight tent, is to kind of put it on its side, right? And to kind of shake out all of the internals like that. Right? You can actually go inside as well. Get in there and just clean it up. Just like that. Okay, so once that's good and clean, we can move on to the next step. So the other thing is, if your tent is still wet on the bottom side, what I tend to do is I just kind of put it on its side and leave it kind of facing the sun as well. Just so that the backside can dry out a little bit. So depending if your tent is wet or not, you can skip this step, but it's a really good way of making sure that everything is nice and dry. Okay, the next step here is to remove the poles. Now before you do that, you basically want to close all the doors, but there's a little trick that I've learned over the years of camping and folding tents is you don't want to zip it up all the way. You just want to basically leave a gap at the bottom open here, as well as any other doors. And basically what that does is when you collapse your tent down, any of the trapped air that's kind of within the tent itself, even though it can come out of the mesh here, it's just a little bit easier to come out of this bottom portion here, which has a lot of this non-really breathable material. So it just makes it a lot easier when you're rolling it up. Okay, so once you finish up zipping up all the doors, you can basically take the poles off of the tent body itself. Now in this case, the tent body clips on with these little clips that kind of come off. However, your tent might be different. They might have poles that slide into place. So basically you just want to unslide them out of their attachment points. You want to disconnect them from the base of the tent as well. What I like to do is I like to start from the top and kind of work my way back to the bottom. Okay, now once your tent's disconnected, you want to take your poles off of their connecting points. So these grommets at the bottom, disconnect them. Okay, and now once your tent's poles have been disconnected, you can basically collapse them down. And in this case, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the tent poles are free of debris. So as you're doing this, you can use your hands, or if you want to use a towel, you can kind of clean them off as you go. By doing that, protects these connection points. See how they kind of easily slip in and slip out? If there's debris that kind of builds up around those connecting spots, it's going to be harder to kind of assemble and disassemble your tent. So take extra care to keep the tent poles kind of clean. And you basically want to focus on the ends of the tent poles because they're going to be the ones that are more or less contacting the ground. So brush them off as you go. The cool thing about this tent, it's a hub design, so all the poles are pretty much connected. You just have to kind of follow them down. I'll show you a little bit closer. So it's basically, I'm talking about these kind of connection points here. See, they kind of slip in very easily. And if dirt and debris gets kind of stuck in here or stuck in this end, it just makes it harder to kind of pull them apart or put them together. So something to be mindful of. Okay, now once all your tent poles are collapsed, all you have to do is just put them in the tent pole bag. Just like that. Do the same thing. Just tie that off as well. Okay, nice and neat. Now the tent poles and the bag itself that's containing the tent poles is pretty important. So what that's going to do is it's going to act as a guide when you start folding the actual tent itself. And I'll show you that in just a sec. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna place the tent poles more or less next to our tent here. And we're just gonna jump into the next step, which is folding the actual tent body. So you wanna start off by making sure any of this mesh or the top material is more or less evenly spaced out, if not in the center of this. That just makes it, when you fold it, there aren't any areas where it's there's a lot of excess material. So you wanna make sure it's kind of in the middle there. And so what we're gonna do is, we're gonna try to maintain a rectangle shape when we fold the tent body itself. And this is gonna be true for the Rainfly as well as the footprint as well, which again, might not be applicable in your case, but I'll show you them in all cases. So what we're gonna do is, this tent is already more or less rectangular, right? But again, we wanna use the tent poles as a guide. So if we look, you can do 1, 2, 3. You can fold this tent into thirds and use the poles as a guide of how much you need to do. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold a third like this and a third like that, right? And I'm gonna put my tent poles on one end like this here. I'm gonna go to the other end and basically follow those lines to the end here as well. Okay. Hey, buddy. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the maximum width of the tent as I'm going to eventually roll this to be no more wider than the tent poles, because the bag that all this comes in is just as long as the tent poles, and we want to make sure that all the fabric and all the material is folded so that it's no wider than the tent poles themselves as well. Okay, so the other thing I want to mention is, depending on the size of your tent, you might be able to do a thirds like I had done here, or you could have to do quarters. So you have to fold each of the ends in and then fold that in half as well. So depending on the size of your tent, its overall dimensions, you want to make sure that you ought to do thirds or quarters. All right, so the next step here is to do the same kind of folding technique, but for the tent fly itself. So what we're gonna do is, once it's dry, whether that's hanging off the dry line or it's already all the moisture's been removed, we basically want to set it up so that we can fold it into a rectangle shape. And then from there, we're gonna fold it so that it's no wider than the tent poles. And we'll grab the tent poles to make sure it's no wider than that. So depending on how the wind's blowing too, let the wind, or take advantage of the wind. Okay, and this is more or less a diamond shape. So what we're gonna do is, gonna bring in the edges or the ends kind of in the middle here. Right, and then just going back to grab our tent poles. So let's see. So what I'll do is kind of fold these in a little bit more. Yep, and then what I'll do is I'll just fold this in half as well, like that. Okay, now the width of the Rainfly in its kind of rectangular folded position is no wider than the tent pole bag. All right, again, in this case, my tent came with a tent footprint, so we want to do the same technique here. We want to fold it so that it's in a rectangular shape that's no wider than the tent poles. We'll do the same kind of thing here. So it's about the same size as the tent base itself, so that what we're going to do is we're going to do thirds as well here. We're going to bring it in. Then bring that across. And again, it's no wider than our tent poles. Okay, now we have all of our components more or less folded, and so we can move on to the next step, which is to kind of stack them on top of each other and then roll everything together. So we have our tent body, we have our footprint, and then we have the Rainfly. So what we're just going to do is we're going to place them on top of each other. So I usually put the footprint on the outermost edge because just that's going to be the outer shell and protecting everything else on the inside, which is what it's supposed to do anyways when it's kind of the tent's erected anyway. So we want to put that at the very bottom, and then we're going to stack on top. So I'm going to take the tent fly and I'm just going to half that just to make it a little bit easier to handle. And I'm going to put that on top here like that. Then I'm going to take the tent body and just put that on top of everything like this. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tent poles, kind of put them at one end, and I'm basically going to roll everything together. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to try to go as tight as possible. Again, it doesn't have to be extremely tight, but pretty tight. And I'm going to make sure everything kind of rolls together. And if it's a dirty ground or anything like that, you can brush away dirt as you go. Again, you can use a towel to make sure that none of this, your materials or none of this fabric gets wet or moist. So as you go, kind of dust it off. Now we have this kind of cylinder that's ready to be packed away. All right, we're at our last step here. Now, in some instances, some tents do come with a little bit of fabric material that it usually ships with. Now, let me just see if I can find it here. And basically, this fabric I can use to cinch up my little tent bundle here. This again keeps everything kind of nice and together. Again, you don't have to do this, but since I have this, I'll show you how it's done. And just roll it, make sure it's nice and compact. Bring it together, cinch it down. Put just a half bow on there and cinch that up. So again, there you have it. Now we have our tent bag. Again, it's because it was measured off of the poles, the length of our bundle is no longer than this bag, which is great. First thing you want to put in is your tent stakes, as well as any extra guy lines or your repair kit that might be in here. Put that at the bottom, make sure it's nice and flat if you need to. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put in our roll. And this is where if you take your time and make sure that it's nice and compact, this step's a little bit easier, but it doesn't have to be extremely tight. Right? And once it's mostly in, you can kind of work the bag around. Just push the tent in. Once it's in, just cinch it up. And you're all done. We've basically folded and packed away our tent in a very efficient and effective manner. So next time you're out there, you can do the same thing. And what I really suggest is if you're new and if you're kind of worried about struggling with putting up a tent or even taking it down, go in your backyard or go to a park and practice setting up and taking it down. Use the techniques that I showed you here just to kind of hone your skills so that when you're out there, you're not really struggling, and camping, it should be easy and should be fun. So by practicing beforehand, you can have a great time. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see here, feel free to subscribe or leave a like. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.